Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. There are many reasons that I love to read Katha Pollitt's column in the Nation magazine. She writes about all things political and cultural from a very special perspective of a most intelligent, humorous, and sensitive woman. And I'm so pleased with myself that I can't remember ever disagreeing with her. So thank you and welcome.
Well, you're the only one. Thanks for having me.
I don't know why.
At least I found my ideal
Good,
reader.
you have. But you write other things other than the column in the Nation. You write essays, books, and stuff like that.
I have a volume of poetry coming out in June, which is my second book of poetry.
And I have a friend who told me yesterday that she likes your poetry a lot.
Oh, good.
But you have a book, and it came out last year, I guess.
It came out last year.
And this is the paperback.
Yes. I'm very pleased because the cover of the hardcover was very kind of mysterious and gloomy. and this cover is, book club friendly, cheerful, come on an amusing ride, where the other was, where are we going on this highway? Yeah, right. Oh dear.
And it's called Learning to Drive and Other Life Stories.
Yeah.
And it starts out with a wonderful story about how you learned to drive. Do you drive now?
I do drive now.
Excuse me.
Yeah, that's a very New York story. And so I was criticized a lot for not knowing how to drive well into midlife. This was regarded as ridiculous by some people. But in fact, there are plenty of New Yorkers who don't know how to drive.
My husband has never driven in his life.
There you go. But I use the metaphor of finally getting that license to talk about autonomy for women, coming into your own, being a grown-up, not relying on men. It's interthreaded with the story of a fairly disastrous breakup with, and sort of just coming to realize where you should be in midlife.
Right. It's just a wonderful book to read because it's filled with so many things that I, as a woman, can understand and appreciate. And
well, thank you.
You're right. It should be a book club because it's a little bit. I mean, it's all about reinforcing yourself, right?
Well, yes, it has. It has pessimistic and optimistic messages, but there's a lot to talk about. It's personal essays, so it's not like overtly political so much. It's more.
Oh no, it's a very personal. I think, yeah.
And so it's about things that I think people, not just women, but maybe especially women, think about a lot. For example, love, divorce, betrayal, having a baby, getting a little bit older. There's a piece.
Wait until you get really older.
I'll wait.
Yes, I hope you wait a long time. There was a wonderful thing that your driving teacher told you, and I can't find it. That's what I was looking for.
He said, observation.
That's it.
Observation, Katha.
Yes.
Observation. And he says, look at the big picture, not just what's right in front of you. Yeah. It's very good advice.
It was wonderful.
And
go on. No,
I was just going to say that Ben, my driving instructor, my gentle Filipino driving instructor, he's the hero of the story because he's like the good man. Yeah. He's, he helps you, but he's not judgmental. He's not pushy. He tells you the truth if you ask him, but he isn't like mean and cruel. So at one point I say to him, if I took the test today, what are my chances? And he says, I'd say 50-50. And I'd say, well, I must be really desperate because those seem like pretty good odds.
But then you go on to the next person who doesn't really compliment you and support you and is judgmental in the next chapter. Isn't that the next chapter in it?
You mean my former boyfriend?
Yes.
Well, yes. I mean, there's a section of the book, about 4 stories, that deal with a pretty disastrous breakup with a guy who turned out to be a total philanderer. Should I have realized this? Yes. Am I the only person who didn't realize this about the person they were with? No. So I think this is a pretty common situation. And of course, you feel like a total jerk. Right. But I wanted to look at it. I wanted to look at that experience and think about it. And what does it mean? And I actually got in touch with some of his other girlfriends. I sort of became the journalist he never thought I was, and I relentlessly pursued the story of my own life. And that was very interesting.
And was it helpful to you?
It was extremely helpful. I mean, I describe it as wanting to know the underside of the carpet that I thought I had been standing on. It's good to know where you stand with reality.
Yeah, I always wonder how did a person like you grow up? And then you have a story about your father and the background in your house and home. How do we grow up? How do we begin to think the things we think? Why are there people who think such different things?
Well, that's very mysterious, isn't it? I grew up in Brooklyn Heights on Sydney Place, where my father lived till he died 3 years ago. And there's a story in the book about him, and there's a story about my mother. And I guess, because my parents were radicals in the McCarthy era, you get a kind of slant view of life. You know that your family is different, and you kind of know there are things you are not supposed to talk about outside the family. And I remember, for example, we would go to Jones Beach, and coming home on these hot summer nights in the 50s, my father would roll up the window, and then he would sing all the great old Lefty songs, like The International and Whirlwinds of Danger and Hallelujah, I'm a Bum, and long-haired preachers come out every night. It was sort of a mixture of the communist songs and the old wobbly songs. But he rolled up the window. Now think what that means. It means
air conditioning.
Well, that didn't exist at the time. But what it really means is that in his mind was the thought that maybe someone in a car driving by might hear him, might take down the license, and that would go into the big FBI file in the sky.
So it is a fear, and you knew it, and you understood why he did it.
I think I did. I mean, there were a lot of things when you're a child, you understand them, and you sort of understand them 50-50.
Right. You remember them, though.
You remember them, and the reason you remember them, the reason you remember them is because they seem anomalous. They seem kind of like, well, other people aren't rolling up the window. Why is my father rolling up the window like that?
Right. So that was an era, the McCarthy era. I mean, I grew up in a family that wasn't themselves involved, but had lots of friends that were involved and was very sympathetic to the anti-McCarthy people. So what happens when people who don't grow up in an era like that, how do they frame their ideas and all the things?
Well, I think now there is so much media coming at people from all different angles, whereas if you think back to the 50s, it was a much more monocultural experience. Right. And so I think that it's actually easier for kids to find like-minded people on the internet, for example. Like, let's say you're gay. You're gay and you live in some small town and you think you're the only gay person. You can go online and find a lot of other gay people. Right. And that can be a very transforming thing. And now we find that there are a lot of feminist blogs, like feministing.com and Shakespeare's Sister and Pandagon, and young people are finding them, and they're conducting a kind of conversation with people they've never met, but are similarly exploring. And I think that's really great. There was nothing like that when we were young.
Right. And then as I got older, the consciousness raising groups, but you had to physically be there.
Right.
Now it's the exchange of ideas. I was just thinking when we were talking about McCarthy, I worked at CBS in those days, and in 1952, I had to sign a loyalty oath.
Yeah.
So it was, and then of course we had all of the different things that went on. It was such a troubling time. How do you then take it today? How do people make up their mind how they're going to react? I mean, let's talk about Sarah Palin. Well, why do some people think, greet her with great joy and others with just shock?
Well, I think probably your basic political orientation and your party affiliation helps. I think Sarah, and also your race. I mean, I'm not sure if Sarah Palin has too many fans among people of color, women or men. Let's remember, though, white men like Sarah Palin more than white women do. Although, she's helped a little bit with white women. But I think, for a lot of people, they look at Sarah Palin, they think, oh, she's a very believing Christian, and so am I, and she's anti-abortion, and so am I. But she's tough. She's not. And in a way, it's terrible for feminism, and it's good for feminism. It's terrible for feminism because she stands against everything that we believe. For example, reproductive rights and pay equity, support for pay equity in law, and being able to go to the library and read the books you want to read, as opposed to the books that, you know, her church wants you to read. But in another way, and maybe even a little bit a deeper way, it's very interesting that even these very right-wing fundamentalist women want to get out of the house.
Right, they're out of the kitchen.
They want to have a public life. They are not, you know, subservient to their husbands, and they're not spending their lives baking. Whereas, remember how mad everybody was when Hillary Clinton said, you know, I suppose I could have stayed home and baked cookies. Oh my God, you know. Well, nobody's saying Sarah Palin should stay home and bake cookies.
It is. It's such an interesting. So, do we call her a feminist?
Well, you know, I'm not so stuck on.
What does a feminist mean?
I mean,
she's obviously a strong woman.
She's a strong woman, and if it encourages other women to be all that they can be, great. That is great. However, we are not running a feminist popularity contest here. It's an election. And I would not vote for Sarah Palin, no matter how wonderful she was and how much I liked her as a person, because she has politics I completely disagree with, that I think would be a disaster for the country. And I don't think she's ready, and neither does David Brooks, of all people. You know, running the country, it's a big job.
What I don't like, what bothers, it's not, I shouldn't say I don't like, but what bothers me about her is she's so bold. She has no doubt.
That's very interesting. You know, when Charlie Gibson interviewed her, and he said, you know, well, how did, you know, when they offered you this, did you hesitate? And she's, no. I didn't blink. No, she says, I couldn't blink, I didn't blink. You have to be committed to the mission. And I'm thinking, you know, you'd think you'd want anybody, no matter how prepared, experienced, brilliant, and devoted to their cause they were, to have a moment where they said, Lord, I'm not worthy, you know?
Absolutely.
It's a really big job. And that she didn't hesitate. This politician who's the governor of this tiny state, population-wise, and before that a town of, you know, 5, 6, 7,000 people, that's really a remarkable psychological statement. I don't get it.
I don't either. It's an amazing kind of thing. But when you're talking about young people on the internet and feminists, let's talk about women for a while. What about all this lamenting about, you know, the women's movement, and it's gone, it's here, it's what? What do we say about that?
Well, I'm really tired of that conversation.
I am too.
I'm very tired of that conversation. I do think, you know, and I know a lot of older feminists, and I know a lot of younger feminists, and I actually think the younger feminists are great, and they get a very bad rap from the older feminists. They get a bad rap partly in a maternal way, like how can you go out of the house wearing that? Because we've forgotten, some of us, what we used to go out of the house wearing, you know? And you would just think the way they talk about the sexual freedom, or whatever you want to call it, of the young, that they themselves had all been virgins when they got married, and that was very far from being true. They've just forgotten their own shenanigans. And I just think, you know, life moves on. You cannot expect people to have the not just the same mindset, but the same culture. I mean, I think a lot of this.
But they're also so judgmental. That's what what fascinates me. And you just said, the way they look, what they talk about, how they've forgotten this, or it's always a judgment about them. I always felt that way about the women's women. I worked at Ms. You know, during a good time, and the basis of reproductive freedom is you have the right to control your own body. Well, we have the right to control our own lives. If we want to dress a little peculiar, we dress it.
Absolutely,
you know, so
I completely agree.
Felt that a lot of feminists are exceedingly judgmental.
Well, people are judgmental, and people are judgmental, and also, you know, feminism is not just about having the good laws. It's also about, it gets into questions of sexuality and what is femininity? What is it to be a woman? Those are, you can't really get entirely away from those questions, but very quickly thinking about those questions can become extremely reductive, and it's like, oh, you're wearing high heels. I don't like that. Or you're not wearing high heels. Right. I don't like that.
I remember once at Ms. I said, I'm going for a manicure. You have manicures? That struck in my mind, so it took me aback.
Yeah, but you know what's funny? I bet if you looked at every single woman who said that, you have manicures back then, they're having manicures
right now. But then there's a whole difference with humanism, if you believe that everybody should be treated with dignity, and everybody should be really able within the confines of rational living to do what they want and everything. Where do we be treated equally, not only with dignity, but treated equally? Then how do we separate out, again, femininity?
Well, I think, there are people who say, I don't want to call myself a feminist, I want to call myself a humanist. Because they're thinking of the broader, a very broad picture of social justice. And that's fine, except for one thing, which is historically, women's rights have tended to be the add-on, the afterthought, we'll do that after we do this other thing. And it's there are aspects of women's situation that are very specific. And if you kind of don't, feminism is a way to connect all those things. And once you lose that word, then I think you can lose the organizing around that. Then it becomes, well, what about animal rights?
Right. And I do believe there's a woman's perspective that's very different. I mean, I really believe that there's a women's perspective in public policy and stuff that women generally will react differently. And then, of course, you get Sarah Palin, and that destroys the whole theory.
Yeah, well, Sarah Palin has been very good at using that idea of a woman's perspective to shore up her own shoddy credentials. For example, I'm a mother. I mean, has it ever seemed more ridiculous to vote for someone because they had a lot of children? I mean, to be the president? I can't believe it. Right. But if you look at some of these things that she's saying, you can go way back and see that there are feminists who have said things that aren't all that different. For example, being a mother, you're there solving disputes on the playground. That's sort of like solving disputes in the United Nations. Well, it sort of is, but
it's not really.
But it's not really enough to, to be ambassador to the United Nations. Because these are very complicated systems, and you actually have to know things.
Well, that goes back then to the fact that she's bold and thinks she knows enough.
Yeah.
How did you account? What did you follow? Did you think it followed in a logical way the Clinton campaign? I mean, did she start running as a feminist? Did you think when you thought
of Clinton start running as a feminist?
When you thought of Hillary Clinton before this primary started, would you say that she was a feminist?
Well, I would say. Yeah,
she's a strong woman.
But I would say she's a feminist, and I would say she supported some things that were very good for women. For example, it's because of her and Patty Murray that emergency contraception is available over the counter if you're 18 or over. And that's very good. And she gave a wonderful speech in Beijing in the 90s about global women's rights. I don't think that I think she was very wary of making an appeal for women's votes because she had to get the votes of men too, and men. There's a lot of hostility to Hillary Clinton, and in fact, there's a lot of hostility to feminism and to women in politics that Sarah Palin doesn't get because she's a right winger. So the people who make those kinds of arguments, they're for her for completely opportunistic reasons.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
But a lot of the men who say they support her aren't necessarily just right wingers. Now, is she a sex symbol to some of those men?
Well, you'll have to ask.
I don't know.
I don't think that Sarah Palin
They picked that up on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, that wonderful skit with Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. That's
kept,
hilarious.
Flirting and doing all that kind of stuff.
Well, I did get an email from a man who hated one of the posts I had done about Sarah Palin, who said, I have to admit, a woman with in a bikini and an AK-47 is kind of hot. And they're alluding to this famous photoshopped picture of her. That a few people thought was genuine, but of course it's not. But I guess getting back to Hillary Clinton, she had to tread this very narrow line that's now been thrown to the winds. I think, you know, it was interesting, if she had made a more direct appeal to women, would she have gotten no, I think maybe she would have gotten, you know, fewer votes to put her over the top, because there were a lot of women who, for one reason or another, really don't like Hillary Clinton. A piece of mine is in an anthology called However Many Ways of Looking at Hillary Clinton, most of the articles were quite negative about her. People, you know, there's a certain kind of woman who does not go for her.
Well, I was surprised. Gloria wrote that piece in the Times early in the campaign about between Obama and Clinton. And she said that about the glass ceiling, that in corporations, the only women who seemed to get ahead have had some connection to the top person or the executive, or been a wife or a mother. And I always felt that to be such a hero to women, and being the first woman to run for president, that she wasn't she wasn't the smart, independent woman who's running for president. She was a former president's wife.
Yeah.
That gave her the edge up.
Yes, well, she was a mixed, she was a transitional figure.
Yeah. That's a good way of saying it.
But I was an Obama supporter. I was never a Hillary Clinton supporter, although I would have been, you know, I said, you know, if she won the nomination, I would work my fingers to the bone, because the really important thing is for Democrats to win the White House. And that's much more important than which of them it is. But I think a lot of, you know, here, this just occurred to me, that I think for a lot of people who don't like Hillary Clinton, men and women too, it disturbs them that she's so obviously smarter than they are. This is not a problem they will have with Sarah Palin.
That's interesting.
That Hillary Clinton she really knows a lot.
Right.
Anna Quinlan said to me, you know, that when times she's interviewed Hillary Clinton has just amazed her with the depth and breadth of her policy knowledge. Which isn't the only thing you want in a president, but it's certainly one of the things you want in a president. We haven't had that with the guy who's been there for the last 8 years, and that hasn't been good. And whereas with Sarah Palin, you know, she's campaigning as, I'm every woman. I don't know any more than you do, but you don't really need to know a lot.
But you get a feeling that she's going to she could easily take us into a war with
oh yeah, well,
I mean, that's what's so astonishing.
Perhaps yes, Charlie, as she said.
I can see it from my window.
Yeah.
But it does go back. It brings us back to the beginning. That how many people tolerate a really strong woman versus an attractive, non-threatening woman? I mean, she doesn't seem to be threatening to anybody. Is that right?
Well, I see Sarah Palin as extremely threatening.
That's right. That's true.
No, and you know, I think that. Well, we'll have to, you know, you should have this discussion again in a couple of weeks and see how she's doing, because I do think that the information that's coming out about Sarah Palin
agree with you.
Is a real turnoff. I mean, there was a big article in the Sunday Times about how she has run Wasilla and Alaska, and it's very disturbing, and it fits, in fact, certain stereotypes about women in power. For example, excessive personalization. Their husband is involved in everything. It's all very secret.
That's interesting.
Yeah, she practically uses the high school yearbook to fill important positions with people who have no qualifications whatsoever. And I'm thinking, yeah, who does this remind you of? You know?
Yes, it's just the same.
Yeah, it's Bush in a dress, basically.
Yeah. When you write your columns in The Nation, do you get responses from people who, I mean, the people who disagree with you but are still leaning to the left? Or do people of totally different ideology read The Nation? Or respond to your columns?
I would say that the web has transformed the response to The Nation. When we were a print magazine, we mostly reached like-minded people who subscribed or picked it up on the newsstand. Now with the web, my column's always on the website at www.thenation.com, and I get a lot of conservative readers and a lot of people who are just in the middle, and then also people forward things and people post them on other blogs. So I would say my column gets out way beyond our subscription base, and that's true for the other writers on The Nation too, which is really a wonderful thing. From the writer's point of view, it makes it harder to make a living, but you have more readers.
Do you have a website?
I do. But my website is, it just updates people on all the fascinating things I've been doing. And it's www.kathapolitt.com.
And do we read about your book on that website?
There's some reviews up there, and it also lists my speaking engagements and stuff like that.
So,
and my column and my blogs are linked there.
So we hope that people are going to read Learning to Drive.
Well, I think it would be a really fun book club read. Yeah. I'm in a book club.
Are you? What kind of books do you read?
Oh, it's so great. It's transformed my life. People say, Katha, right? You're in a book club? Yes, I'm in a book club, and it's wonderful.
So what are you reading?
We read contemporary fiction. We read the book of the moment. The last book we read was Jhumpa Lahiri's Unaccustomed Earth. And as a result of being in this book club, I read a lot of fiction in a timely fashion that I wouldn't have read before. Tree of Smoke by Dennis Johnson, 600 pages about the war in Vietnam. I might have read it when it was in paperback. If people were still talking about it in 4 years, I might have read it. Junot Diaz, wonderful, The Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde.
So is your book club going to read this?
They've all been given their free copies.
Well, we've come to the end of this half hour, so let's reinforce it again. Book club people, please read this book, and everybody should. It's delightful. Read your column, and I so appreciate your being here, and I love your opinions.
Thank you so much for having me, Ronnie. It's really been great.
That's great. Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.